Hello everybody, it is Wednesday and that means it is time for another episode of Daily Dose of Doll. If you're new to the show, this is kind of where we get down to the nitty-gritty about topics. We talk about things that can probably have pretty different opinions on either side. People can get really passionate about talking about them, but they're topics that we all go through, we all experience, and we all have an opinion on. Whether or not they're important topics or they're topics that really affect mankind, probably some. But then there's others that it doesn't really matter in the long run because it's not something important. It's just something that people talk about. So we've talked about some pretty cool things on the show, and in the nature of how I do things, I usually pull my video topics based out of something that's going on in my life so I can share my opinions and things that I'm going through as honest as possible with you guys, because let's face it, how more honest can you be about a situation than when you're actually going through it and can really express emotionally while that emotion is still new, right? So this week, you guys definitely during the live feed and in some other places on social media, you guys let me know that you did want to talk about things that have to do with the situation I'm going through right now, because it's something that all of you guys are actually going through in one way or another as well. The more that I shared, the more that I realized that while I'm going through this situation, so many of you are going through the same thing, and I thought that it'd be great if we just kind of talked about one of those topics, and I've chosen the topic that I chose because I think that it can touch on the most points and all the different aspects and some really life-affecting relationships in our lives. So today's topic that I'm going to be sharing my opinion on, and I want you guys to share your opinion on as well, because opinions do matter. In a sense, opinions do matter when they're positive opinions that can help people change and grow in healthy ways. Destructive opinions that do nothing but speak blindly and tear people down and hurt them and their energies in a negative way, those are the kind of opinions you want to stay away from. But there's definitely some good opinions out there, and good opinions can change lives. So I'm going to share my opinion. You guys are going to share your opinions, and hopefully we can all grow together. Remember, I do support being a little salty if your opinion has things to do with humor and sarcasm, but we definitely never make it a point to emotionally hurt or destroy people. That's not the business we're in life. So opinions, like I said, healthy opinions change lives. Negative opinions can destroy them. So this week's topic is toxic relationships. That's right, we're going to be talking about toxic relationships, whether it's with your significant other, it is with a family member, a parent, a friend, and even a boss or a coworker. We're going to be talking about toxic relationships. So, I'm going to share my, story of my involvement with toxic relationships. I'm going through something right now that recently opened up my eyes to, unfortunately, a really sad perspective of something in my life, and that's how I perceive my parents. And first and foremost, I love my parents. I respect my parents in more ways than I don't. I appreciate them, and I appreciate everything that they've given me and my kids. I was raised better than most people, and it's things that didn't really hurt me in any sense until I got older, because as a kid you don't have to deal with that kind of stuff. But so toxic relationships, they come in a lot of forms. They really do. I've dealt with 2 different forms. I've dealt with a significant other or partner, and family related toxic relationships. And I guess I've had a friend toxic relationship. So I've had 3 different forms. So family, significant other, and friend that were all toxic to me. So the friend, it's not that finger. The friend one's the easiest story to tell. But I started working, when I worked at Ulta, there was an individual she began working there as holiday help. Ultimately, she was a beautiful human being, but she had a lot of pain, from what I could see. And this girl very openly wore her emotional issues just in her behavior. It was very loud. It was asking for help. And at that point, I was going through a really, really horrible spot in my relationship with my ex-husband. It's a little math. With my ex-husband. And I just wasn't a strong person at all. I was looking for an escape. That was at the point in my life I just turned 19. And that's when me and my ex were really rocky at the time, but that's when he was really pushy about sharing me with other people. And it just wasn't something that I was open to. It wasn't something that I wanted anything to do with. And because of that, I was made to feel really, really bad. You don't love me, you don't blah, blah, blah. But this girl was somebody that he would bring over because he knew she drank to complete oblivion, and he knew he wanted to take advantage of that. And I also had just started drinking a little bit, so he knew that when he got her and I together and got us both very, very drunk, she was one of those very touchy-feely people. She had no boundaries, and she had no fears in crossing anybody else's boundaries. But I found that it was an occurrence. Anytime she would come over to hang out with us, it was always about drinking and very self-destructive things, things that I didn't want, things that my ex, as an abuser, preyed on, and it was just a really bad relationship. Like, she needed a lot of love, and somebody to listen to her and talk to her, and I definitely wasn't in a state to be able to give her that type of support or advice. And I loved her. Like I said, she was a beautiful individual, and it was hard, but I knew I had to cut off that relationship because it was toxic for me. It was nothing but drinking, doing things and being talked into things that I didn't want to do. And ultimately, nothing happened to me. I'd like to state nothing horrible. I wasn't made to say yes to things that I didn't want to do because nothing really happened. Because I was still very closed off at that point, sexually. I'll just be open about it. So the idea of having that kind of relationship with my boyfriend at the time and a good friend of mine, it was just very terrifying to me. I wasn't open to it at all. So that was always the goal, was to try and get me so drunk that I would just say yes to it, but it never happened. So I thwarted his plan every time. But that girl I knew needed severe help, and my ex just kind of fed into her illness and her issues to take advantage of them. So I knew that for her sake and for my sake, I did help her figure out a way to get back to her hometown, which she had left, and back to people who love her and could take care of her. And a few years later, she did call me. Or no, she texted me. She didn't call me. And I was sitting in the floor playing with Ben, who was only a few minutes old. But we talked, and it was great to hear from her, and she's doing so much better now that she went home and she joined Job Corps and was getting her life on track and getting emotional help and support. And it was great to hear. It was great to hear that she not only did go back home, but she did so wonderfully. So, but it was a toxic friendship. And maybe it wouldn't have been if there wasn't other parties involved, but I definitely hope she's still out there doing as amazing as she was last time I talked to her. So the second toxic relationship that I went through was, of course, with my ex, and it was a very, it wasn't a physically abusive relationship, but it was very abusive in all the other aspects. And I didn't realize how toxic it was. You know, when I got into it I was almost 17 when him and I first got together, and I went into it so blind and so naive and so sheltered, and nobody had ever talked to me about relationships or boyfriends or anything that has to do with that. So I went into it very blind, and I just kind of had to fumble through it, and it was a bad deal. You know, it was a really bad deal. It was very toxic, very controlling, very abusive, but I didn't realize how toxic that relationship was until I got out of it. When I got out of it, I was really able to, after I went through all those stages, you know, get out of it. You go through the heartbreak stage where you think you're going to die. Nothing matters, nothing makes sense, and you just want to crawl into a hole and pull the dirt in over your head. Then you go through, you know, the denial phase where, no, this isn't happening, it's going to be okay, we're going to work through this, everything's going to be alright. Then you go through your anger phase where you're just so pissed off, you just want to murder that person. And then you get to the point where you accept it. You know, you accept that this is it. This is your future now. This is what's gonna happen. And then you have the peace and move on phase. And it's when I finally got. I kind of feel like I went through the angry phase for a really long time. In all honesty, I mean, I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I went through the angry phase, I feel like, longer than I should have, but I did. And it wasn't until, you know, you really get past it and you really start looking at that relationship and you're like, oh my gosh, holy shit, you know, that I was in a very toxic relationship. And I think that a lot of people don't realize that sometimes the person that you love so much can sometimes be the worst person for you, and it's a toxic, designed to fail relationship, you know. And I'm not talking about how people in relationships can do really horrible things and then come past it and work on. I'm talking about cut and dry, toxic people, toxic relationships. And my ex was very toxic to me. And I didn't realize why until here recently when like the whole setup came full circle. But my ex was kind of set up for me, because now reflecting through all the bits and pieces, my ex was a narcissist, 100%. And now I'm coming to learn that my mom has narcissistic traits that I believe are brought on by a mental issue. I do. Which is, I think, what sets them apart in different ways. But they do portray a lot of the same control and actions and behavior towards me and to me. So I think that's why I opened up to my ex, because I didn't want anything to do with dating or boys or anything my entire life. You know, I had a crush on my brother's best friend for a long time, but I didn't, like, the thought never crossed to date him. Like, I just liked him. Like, I wanted to be around him and look at his perfect spiky hair and, you know, but, like, I didn't want to date him or do anything with him. I just wanted to be in the same room with him. But I never wanted to date through my teen years until I met my ex. And it's like when I met my ex, it was a weird feeling. It was a familiar. It was that I was, for some reason, I could never put a finger on it until now, but I had this comfortable, familiar feeling, and that's because his behavior towards me reflected so much of how some of the people in my life behaved, you know, and I could be totally 100% wrong, but that's how I feel about it. Like, that's how it kind of makes sense to me, and I could be wrong, and if I was wrong and somebody proved me to be so, I would accept it, but that's kind of how I saw it. And the longer I was with him, the worse it got. But now that I'm going through what I'm going through with my mom, it's starting to become obvious that their behavior towards me is the same in a lot of the aspects. And I think that, you know, he was just right out the gate toxic to me. But my brain didn't see it. My brain didn't allow it. When signs would come up, I would make excuses for them, or I would completely deny them, because I just wanted that relationship to always be safe. Like, I always wanted to secure that relationship, but it didn't matter what I did ever, because it was born to fail. Like, he was toxic to me 100%. He was not somebody, he wasn't my counterpoint in any stretch of the imagination. It was all negative. And it wasn't, I mean, I don't think that he's a bad person on purpose. I think that people grow and get turned into things depending on who they're around in life and how they live their life. And I think that ultimately you turn into all the things that represent you most. And unfortunately, I think more of the negative represents the positive. But like I said, I've gotten to a point where I'm completely past that pain of it, and it took me a long time to get here, but I am here now, and it's really easy to see how toxic he was to me and how our relationship never would have worked out because he's not who I need. And I wasn't who he needed. I mean, let's be real. We didn't complement each other in any positive ways. It was all negative. It was all toxic. And I did have to get to the point where I finally was able to accept and realize that this was it. This is how our relationship, because of who we are, is going to be. And I shouldn't have to change, you know, and he shouldn't have to change. And we should both be held accountable for how we treat people. And if he chooses to continue to treat people the way he treated me, that's on him. And I'm going to treat people the way I believe people should be treated, and that's on me. So, in the scope of things, you know, I came out of that toxic relationship a much better and a much stronger person. So I do look back and try to see it as a more positive thing than allow it to eat at me negatively. But the third toxic relationship I am just now realizing is my parents and my sister, sadly. My big brother is always like this moot party that never really says much unless you poke the bear. I love him, and I know that if I called him and said, hey, you know, he'd be there. But I am coming to acknowledge the fact that I think that my parents and my sister are toxic, and it's something that I've never really thought about or noticed until now, and I see things very, very differently than I did. But I'm realizing that throughout my entire life, a lot of my drawbacks were from certain aspects of how I was raised and how I was brought up, and now it's very toxic to me since I'm coming out of, you know, a marriage that was so toxic and a relationship that was so toxic, and now for 3 years I've been growing and learning and evolving and changing, and becoming stronger and stronger and more confident in myself and more sure in myself. So it's dangerous for somebody like me who's coming out of that situation, and is kind of sensitive to that situation, to be attacked and manipulated by another source that would provide me the same type of interaction that my ex did. So I've gotten to the point where I love the people that have been toxic relationships to me, but I also have to come to grasp the fact that the relationship that I want with them might not be the relationship that I get. And instead of, and this is a really hard thing to do, because when it's toxic, you first have to acknowledge that it's toxic, and sometimes it's really hard to do, especially when you're in it so much with your heart and your emotions. Like, for instance, you're dating somebody or you're married to somebody, and you just love that person so much and you've invested so much of yourself that sometimes it's hard to admit that they're toxic, and sometimes it's hard to admit, well, not even sometimes, let's just be honest, most of the time, pretty much like 98% of the time, it's really hard to say, we're not good for each other and we need to step away from this, you know, and you don't want to, and you keep telling yourself that it's going to change and it's going to get better, but in the long run, most of them aren't going to change and get better. And I'm sorry if that kills anybody's hopes and dreams about what they're going through in a relationship, but what you have to realize is that who you're with is who you're with. You know what I'm saying? Or your parents are your parents, or whoever this person is who they are, and they're not going to change overnight for you if they're going to change at all, right? Like, these people are who these people are. And in a relationship, as far as like significant others go, you do have to be willing to kind of to bend and move together, you know, like the ocean, like a wave. You have to be willing to give when you need to give, and be willing to put more out when you need to put more out. And you do have to have that compromise in a relationship, but you also have to respect the fact that whoever it is you're with, that's them 100%. And unfortunately, if there's like a big thing, it's not going to change overnight, especially if you've said it a million times and it's still nothing. If you brought it to their attention and they don't care enough, or maybe they're not capable of changing. You know what I'm saying? So you have to remove yourself. You have to protect yourself from that person, because they're not going to change for you. And, you know, sometimes in toxic relationships, people aren't horrible people. You know, you just don't mesh with that person. There's different levels of that toxic relationship. There's the really, really bad, where there's an obvious victim, an obvious, you know, aggressor. And then there's those sides where some people just aren't compatible. You know what I'm saying? Like, who you are isn't bad and who you are isn't bad. But unfortunately, your puzzle pieces don't fit together. And this isn't a sexual reference, so please nobody take it there. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't be mad at somebody for being who they are. And if you don't match who they are, you don't complement who they are, then maybe you're meant to move on. And hopefully you guys can part ways positively. But then there's, you know, aspects where it's parents. And you can't allow yourself to constantly be destroyed just because they're your parent. You know, you can't let your husband or your wife tear you down just because you guys are married. Behavior is wrong. Treating people certain ways is wrong. And if the wrongdoer isn't going to accept who they are and what they're doing and change their behavior, then you need to protect yourself, and you have every right to do that. You have every right to leave the relationship or do something that changes it for your benefit. You know, I think that at some point, all of this is going to come full circle with my mom and my dad and my sister, and it's ultimately going to be on me to be forgiving. If I want a relationship with them. Because I do believe everything's going to come to light, and they're going to see that what they're accusing me of isn't accurate. It's not a fact. So once that huge obstacle is removed from their vision, and they can really see, and they see that I would never do anything like that to them, and I haven't done anything like that to them, that I do think it's going to come full circle, but it is going to be on me to be forgiving. And I don't know how I'm going to feel. You know, I really don't. I don't know how I'm gonna react to that, you know, as of right now. I'd like to say that I will be forgiving and I will be able to move past it, but I will protect myself, and I have the right to protect myself. And sometimes with toxic parents and siblings or people that you can't really not be around, the best way to do it is to love from afar. You know what I'm saying? Like, you guys don't agree on the way to live life. You don't agree on how to think, how to feel. You don't agree on what color the sky is. Sometimes it's just easier to just be around that person enough to feed off the good energy that you guys have together, and then leave before any of the bad energy can totally fuck up that relationship. And sometimes that works for people. You know what I'm saying? And I'm hoping that I get to the point where we can all get past this, and I can still go down for, you know, holidays or birthday parties and still get some good moments, so that the whole relationship isn't thrown away. But I don't know if that's going to turn out. But ultimately, toxic relationships can come in a lot of different forms. They can. They can come in abusive, non-abusive, whatever that relationship is. If it's tearing you down and destroying you, it's toxic. And sometimes toxic relationships can be salvaged, and if that's the case, that's amazing. But I think that sometimes that a toxic relationship is just something put in our life to teach us something that's going to make us stronger in the long run. I mean, so far that's what every toxic relationship has taught me, is that I'm strong and that I can do it, because so many people told me that I couldn't do it. And oh, Emily's just makeup and hair, Emily's just, she doesn't want to get dirty, she's like, I've always been painted and put into this box that doesn't define me at all, but it's what people have tried to define me as, and I keep breaking down every single wall they put in front of me. And I think that when we invest our time into a toxic relationship, it completely removes our attention from growing and getting stronger and moving forward in our lives and bettering ourselves. Toxic relationships are just a big old set of brakes in progression, like 100%, in my opinion. That's what I've come to see them as, is it's just one thing to completely take all the wind out of your sails and stop you from getting to your final goal. So that's my stint on toxic relationships. Hopefully my stories and views and opinions can help anybody out there struggling with a toxic relationship. Remember, these are just my views and opinions, and you can agree with them, you can disagree with them. Either way, you can leave your comment below. Remember, we can be a little salty. There's definitely no room for pure hate in the comment feed, so try to keep it to yourself. If you can't, go stand in the mirror and just yell. That helps. Get that anger out. Just let it go. Remember that every week I create an event on my Facebook page that talks about the topic that we are going to be talking about on Daily Dose of Doll. So I make the event, you guys get to recommend what I should talk about, and I pick what I'm going to talk about, and then we can all talk in the event. You can let me know you're watching. You can leave your comments and questions about whatever the topic is in the event page, and I can answer it live to you on the air. But until next time, this was Daily Dose of Doll. That's Toxic Relationships. I will see all of you guys Friday at 5 p.m. Central Mountain Time? I'm in Texas. 5 p.m. And we will be doing a live chat, fantastic fan Friday live chat, where we can just hang out and talk to each other. But in the meantime, remember that I love you, that I'm in your corner rooting for you, and nobody deserves being stuck in a toxic relationship. You need to know that you're worth more than that, you deserve more than that, and there's always a way out, even if it feels like you're drowning. Ask for help, come to me, come to those who love you, because I guarantee that even though you might feel a little blinded and one-sided, there are people out there that love you and that would be more than happy to help you through whatever it is you're going through. So, I'm Emily Doll. That was Daily Dose of Doll. Remember to subscribe to this channel. There's a button right there. If you subscribe, you get to watch my videos the night before. But remember, I love your faces. Stay amazing.